The Galactic Military Academy was unlike anything Samuel Roberts had ever imagined. The towering walls of the training hall were lined with holographic displays of battles fought in far-off galaxies. Alien cadets, some towering over him, some sleek and fast, moved with an air of superiority, each one more advanced than the next. And in the middle of it all, Samuel stood alone, a human among giants with nothing but a simple tool belt, a set of worn-out clothes, and the weight of the galaxy's expectations on his shoulders. From the moment he'd arrived, the whispers had started. They thought he didn't belong. Humans were an underdeveloped species in a galaxy full of advanced beings. Earth's technology was centuries behind the others, and Samuel was no different. The cadets from other species had enhancements, cybernetic limbs, plasma-powered gadgets, and sleek energy weapons. They were built for combat, designed for war. And Samuel was human, a human who had earned his place at the academy not because of his size or advanced weaponry, but because of his resilience. But that didn't stop the others from laughing. They saw him as a weakling, a relic from a forgotten past. When the instructor had announced that the next class would be about ranged weapons, Samuel had been prepared for the usual mockery. It wasn't just the aliens that made fun of him, it was the academy's expectations. The rules were clear. Create a ranged weapon, something innovative and powerful. And in a room filled with cadets who had access to advanced technology far beyond anything Earth could provide, Samuel knew his chances of standing out were slim. But he wasn't going to back down. The instructor, a tall, cold-looking Telkari named Zorlok, paced in front of the class, his voice sharp and unwavering. Today, we test your ability to create. You are to build a ranged weapon, something that can kill, something that can survive in the harshest conditions. You have an hour, impress me. The cadets around Samuel immediately got to work. A Zalgan cadet pulled out a complex, energy-infused bow, already crafting a series of glowing arrows. A Calcinian, known for their precision, started assembling a sniper rifle that seemed to hum with deadly power. Each cadet's weapon was a work of art, sleek, advanced, and designed to annihilate. And then there was Samuel. His hands shook as he stood at his bench, looking over the pile of basic materials he had. Nothing fancy. No glowing metals, no high-tech gadgets, just some wood, a strip of rubber, and a few bits of string. The laughter started immediately. Seriously, one cadet whispered, a Telkari named Virak, his eyes narrowing as he saw Samuel's work. You're making a toy. Bet he's trying to launch a rock, another cadet sneered. Samuel didn't respond. He didn't need to. They could laugh all they wanted. He was used to it by now. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that he wasn't building a weapon like theirs. He didn't have the resources, the technology. But he had something else, something far more valuable. He had ingenuity. He had human spirit. The seconds ticked by and Samuel's mind raced. He was no weapons master, but he knew how to survive. He had learned on Earth, through history, through the struggles of his people, that sometimes the simplest tools could be the most effective. With that thought in mind, he began working quickly, assembling his design. He started with a wooden rod, carving it into a smooth, sturdy shape. Then he attached the rubber strips he had found, stretching them tight. He tied the string to both ends, pulling it as tightly as he could. His hands moved faster now, his determination growing stronger with each passing moment. Behind him, the other cadets were making rapid progress. They were all building complex, high-tech weapons that shimmered with power. It was hard not to feel the weight of their success. But Samuel didn't let it affect him. He kept working, his focus laser-sharp. By the time the hour was up, Samuel had finished. He stood back and surveyed his creation, a simple slingshot. It wasn't shiny or sleek like the others. There were no glowing lights, no advanced materials, just a wooden frame, rubber bands, and a simple pouch for a stone. But it was functional, it was effective, and it was all he had. Zorlok's voice broke through his thoughts. Time up, step forward, cadets, show me what you've made. Samuel's heart raced as he walked to the front of the room. The other cadets sneered at him, their eyes glinting with disbelief. They had all seen the slingshot. They knew it was nothing compared to their own creations. But Samuel wasn't here to impress them. He was here to show something else. To show that even in a world of advanced technology, there was room for simplicity. One by one, the other cadets stepped up, showcasing their powerful weapons. The Zalgan cadet released an energy arrow that shot through the air with a high-pitched hum, cutting through the air with deadly precision. The Calcinian aimed his sniper rifle and fired a laser bolt that singed the air with a crack of energy. The instructor nodded at each weapon, his face neutral. Then it was Samuel's turn. He stepped up and held his slingshot in both hands. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just aimed carefully at the drone hovering in the air, the instructor's prized piece of technology. The drone was a marvel, advanced sensors, shields, and the ability to move at incredible speeds. It was designed to withstand anything. Samuel pulled the rubber bands tight, his eyes narrowing with focus. With a flick of his wrist, the stone shot from the pouch, flying through the air at lightning speed. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. The stone hit the drone's sensor with a sharp crack, sending a cascade of sparks through the air. The drone veered off course, its movements jerky, as if struggling to stay aloft. It crashed to the floor with a resounding thud. The room was silent. Zorlok's expression didn't change, but Samuel could see the faintest flicker of surprise in his red eyes. The other cadets stood frozen, disbelief etched on their faces. Samuel's heart raced, but he stood tall, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He had done it. He had just shown them that sometimes simplicity and determination could be just as deadly as the most advanced weapons. Zorlok spoke, his voice low and careful. "Cadet Roberts, I didn't expect that. You have impressed me." Samuel's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. He hadn't done it for Zorlok. He hadn't done it for anyone else. He had done it to prove that no matter how small or underestimated a species was, they could stand tall. And as the room filled with stunned silence, Samuel realized that, for the first time, the galaxy was beginning to see what humanity could do. Samuel's hands trembled as he watched the other cadets demonstrate their creations. The sound of energy arrows slicing through the air, the hum of plasma beams, and the quiet whir of advanced projectiles filled the training hall. Every cadet who stepped forward was met with the approving nods of Instructor Zorlok. Each weapon, more powerful than the last, displayed the very best of their species' technology. And then there was Samuel. His slingshot sat in his hands like a relic, the rubber bands stretched tightly, the wooden frame smooth and worn. He couldn't help but glance at the other cadets, their powerful weapons glinting under the bright lights, their faces filled with confidence. He knew what they were thinking. What can that thing possibly do? He could hear their laughter in his mind, the whispers about how primitive humans were. It was the same every time, in every class, every challenge. Humanity had been left behind in the race for technological superiority, but Samuel was used to it. He had never needed the approval of others. He just needed to survive, and survive he did. Now, standing at the front, the weight of the moment seemed to crash down on him. The others had built plasma bows, energy rifles, and force field generators. He was holding a simple weapon, one that could never compete with their advanced designs. But there was something they didn't know about him, something they couldn't understand. He wasn't afraid. Instructor Zorlok's deep voice broke through the noise. "Cadet Roberts, show us your creation." The cadets fell silent, their eyes turning toward him, some out of curiosity, others with quiet amusement. Samuel took a deep breath, his pulse quickening. This was it. He had no flashy weapon, no glowing blades, just the slingshot and a simple stone. He stepped forward, trying to steady his hands, and positioned the slingshot, aiming it carefully at the hovering drone. Zorlok's drone was a marvel of Telkari engineering, smooth, silent, and almost impossible to hit. But Samuel had something the others didn't: patience. The other cadets had rushed into creating their weapons, focused on power and spectacle. Samuel had focused on the one thing that could make all the difference: precision. With his fingers pulling the rubber taut, he glanced at the drone, lining up his shot. The pressure in his chest felt heavy, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. He couldn't let the voices in his head take over. Just aim, just focus. The stone was small and insignificant, but it could be deadly in the right hands. His hands. "Here goes nothing," Samuel muttered under his breath, more to calm himself than anyone else. And then, with a swift motion, he released the stone. The slingshot whizzed through the air, the stone flying faster than anyone expected. There was a brief moment of silence, the sound of the stone cutting through the air too sharp for anyone to follow. Then, crack! The stone collided with the drone's sensor with a loud, satisfying sound, sending a ripple of sparks flying across the air. The drone swerved, its usual smooth flight interrupted. It hovered unsteadily for a moment, then came crashing to the ground with a resounding thud. The room went silent. The instructors, the cadets, everyone stared in disbelief. Samuel's heart pounded, but he didn't let himself smile. He couldn't yet. The drone was down, but was it enough? The room was still frozen, all eyes now fixed on the human cadet and his primitive weapon. Zorlok, the instructor, stood still, his eyes glowing faintly as he scanned the fallen drone. He said nothing for a long moment, his face unreadable. The silence stretched on, suffocating, as the other cadets stared at Samuel, their expressions ranging from disbelief to confusion. Finally, Zorlok spoke. His voice, always calm and commanding, was almost impossible to read. "Cadet Roberts," he said slowly, his words hanging in the air, "this is unexpected." Samuel's pulse raced as he stood there, unsure of whether he had just done something remarkable or failed miserably. The stone had done what the plasma weapons hadn't, touched the drone's core. It wasn't the flashiest attack, but it had worked. The simple idea, the raw precision, had won over the advanced weapons. For a moment, Zorlok said nothing else. The instructor's eyes, always so cold, seemed to study Samuel with a newfound interest. Then finally, Zorlok's expression shifted just slightly into something resembling approval. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. "Cadet Roberts, your slingshot has disabled the drone. It wasn't the weapon we expected, but it was effective. You have proven something today." Samuel stood still, barely able to believe what he was hearing. Had he really done it? He had shown them that a simple weapon, a weapon so rudely dismissed by everyone else, had outdone the most advanced designs. His slingshot, his hands, his skill, they had done it. It wasn't about the best materials or the highest technology. It was about using what you had and doing the best with it. The silence in the room was deafening, but now there was something different, something unspoken. The other cadets were looking at him with a mix of surprise and something else, respect. It wasn't just Zorlok who had underestimated him. It had been all of them, the whole academy. One of the cadets, a tall and muscular Zalgan named Virak, took a step forward. He had been one of the most vocal in mocking Samuel's slingshot. Now he extended his hand. "Well played, Cadet Roberts," he said, his voice low but sincere. "You proved that we don't always need the most advanced weapons. Sometimes the simplest things can make the biggest difference." Samuel blinked, stunned. Virak's hand was steady, and his voice carried genuine respect. Slowly, Samuel reached out and shook it, the words still ringing in his ears. "Thanks," he said, surprised by how calm his voice sounded. Zorlok turned toward the class, his glowing red eyes sweeping over the room. "Today," he began, his voice cutting through the stillness, "you have seen what happens when arrogance is replaced by resourcefulness. Cadet Roberts has shown us all that simplicity, when used with skill, can be just as powerful as the most advanced technology. You may all learn from this." The instructor's words lingered in the air. The other cadets were quiet now, no longer whispering, no longer mocking. They were watching Samuel, not as a human cadet, but as a peer. They had seen what he could do, and in that moment, Samuel realized something. This was more than a test of weaponry. This was a test of humanity. And they had passed. The room remained silent for a long time after the drone crashed to the floor, its lights flickering weakly as it lay motionless. The cadets, once so confident in their advanced weapons and technology, were now frozen in place. Their gazes shifted between the fallen drone and Samuel, who stood at the front, his hand still gripping the slingshot. Samuel's heart raced, but he didn't let the rush of adrenaline cloud his mind. He knew that he had just done something no one expected, but the shock was still sinking in. What had just happened? His simple slingshot had outperformed the most advanced weaponry in the room. The drone, the pinnacle of technology, was now nothing more than a heap of twisted metal. Instructor Zorlok stood at the far end of the room, his expression unreadable, but his red eyes seemed to flicker with something. Curiosity, perhaps. He was studying Samuel, and it felt as if the weight of the moment had shifted from just a test to something far bigger. Samuel had done what no one thought possible, but would that be enough? The room was still. No one spoke. Then slowly Zorlok began to move forward. His steps were heavy, each one echoing in the silence. The other cadets parted as he approached Samuel, their eyes now filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. Samuel could feel their gazes on him, and it made his skin prickle. He had been the outsider, the underdog, and now, somehow, he had done what they all thought was impossible. Zorlok stopped in front of him, his towering form casting a shadow over the smaller human. The instructor's gaze softened just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Cadet Roberts," Zorlok said, his voice deep and steady, "you've proven something today." Samuel swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think it would work like that." His voice was quieter than he intended, but he couldn't help it. He was still trying to process everything. His heart was racing, but now there was a strange sense of calm, like the storm inside him had finally settled. Zorlok raised a hand, his tone firm. It wasn't luck, cadet, it was skill, resourcefulness. You took what you had and used it better than anyone else. The instructor's red eyes narrowed slightly, almost in thought. And that is what separates those who survive from those who don't. You're not just here to follow orders, you're here to think, to adapt. And today you did just that. Samuel's chest swelled with an emotion he wasn't prepared for: pride. He wasn't just a human in an alien world anymore. He was something else, something worthy of respect, something capable. The cadets, those who had once mocked him, now stood in silence, their expressions no longer filled with disdain. Some were still skeptical, no doubt, but there was a shift. Something in the air had changed. Samuel had earned their attention. He had earned their respect. A soft voice broke through the silence. "I didn't think a human could do it," said Virak, the tall Zalgan cadet who had been one of the loudest in his criticism. I thought we were the only ones with real weapons." His words were hesitant, almost as if he had been forced to swallow his pride. Samuel nodded slowly. "I didn't have a real weapon, but sometimes a simple thing can surprise you." Zorlok's eyes flicked between the two cadets, his expression still neutral. He turned his gaze back to the fallen drone, still emitting faint electrical sparks. "This is the heart of combat: adaptation. It's not about who has the biggest or most powerful weapon. It's about using what you have to the fullest." The other cadets shifted, a murmur spreading through the room. Samuel could see them now, no longer mocking but thinking. They had just witnessed a human, a species they considered weak and unprepared, take down something they could not. And in that silence, he felt something inside him shift. This wasn't just about the test anymore. It was about proving to himself that humans weren't just capable of surviving, they could thrive in a universe that saw them as less. Zorlok's voice cut through his thoughts. "Well done, Cadet Roberts. You've set a new standard today. It will not be forgotten." The words, though calm, felt like a declaration. Samuel stood still, his hands still gripping the slingshot. He wasn't sure what the future held for him at the academy. He didn't know if he would make friends, if the other cadets would continue to see him as one of them. But he did know one thing for certain: he wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't going to let the galaxy define his limits. He would carve his own path, no matter what. Samuel walked slowly through the long, cold corridors of the Galactic Military Academy, the sound of his boots echoing against the metal floor. The morning had been a blur. His heart still pounded from the excitement, from the shock of what had just happened. The other cadets had been quiet, their usual chatter replaced with hushed whispers as they processed the events of the test. His hands were still trembling slightly, but not from fear. No, it was from something else, something unfamiliar: pride. He had done it. Against all odds, with nothing but a simple slingshot, he had taken down Zorlok's prized drone. The Instructor, an alien whose reputation had sent shivers down the spines of every cadet, had even acknowledged him. "Well done, Cadet Roberts. You've set a new standard today." Samuel couldn't shake those words from his mind. They echoed in his thoughts louder than anything else. A new standard. He had thought he would fail, that his creation, something so simple compared to the weapons of the other cadets, would never stand a chance. But he had proved them wrong. He had proved himself wrong. As Samuel rounded a corner, he spotted a few cadets from the class ahead of him, their faces filled with quiet respect. They didn't look at him the same way they had before. The sneers were gone. Instead, they watched him with curiosity, maybe even something like admiration. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. It wasn't the praise he was used to. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was quiet and calm, like they were all still trying to figure out how to approach the fact that a human had just shown them up. He took a deep breath, pushing the thoughts aside. He wasn't here for their approval. He was here to survive. The real test was still to come. "Roberts." The voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him from his introspection. Samuel turned to see Virak, the tall Zalgan cadet who had once been one of the loudest in mocking him. Virak was standing at the end of the hallway, his usual confident swagger replaced by something else. His broad shoulders, normally squared with arrogance, were now slightly hunched. It wasn't weakness, though. It was something else. Humility, maybe. Samuel didn't know what to expect. The last time Virak had spoken to him, it had been full of mockery and derision. But today was different. Samuel could feel the change in the air. Virak took a few steps toward him, looking him up and down as if he was seeing him for the first time. "That was impressive," he said, his voice low, not the loud, boastful tone Samuel had grown used to. "You actually took down the drone, a drone." He shook his head as if trying to process it. I thought you were a joke, but you're not. Samuel could feel his heart skip a beat. The words were simple, but they held weight. It wasn't just that Virak had acknowledged him, it was that he had admitted he had been wrong. About him, about humanity. Samuel didn't quite know how to respond. For so long he had been the one overlooked, the one pushed aside, the one whose very existence was seen as less than. But here, standing before him, was someone who had once laughed at him, now offering respect. I didn't think it would work either, Samuel said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But sometimes the simplest things can surprise you. He glanced down at the slingshot in his hand, which now hung loosely at his side. It was worn, plain, nothing special, but to him it felt like a victory. He had built it with his own hands, using his own knowledge, and it had worked. Virak nodded slowly. I can see that now. I didn't think it was possible. I didn't think anyone could take down Zorlok's drone with something like that. But you did. He paused, his shoulders relaxing. I think I've learned something today. Samuel looked up at him, not sure what to say. He wasn't used to these kinds of conversations. The galaxy didn't always give humans credit. In fact, it rarely did. But Virak's words felt like something more than just a compliment. They felt like an acknowledgement of humanity's worth, something Samuel had been fighting for since the moment he had stepped onto this alien planet. Well, Samuel began, clearing his throat, I think you might be right. Sometimes it's not about how flashy your weapon is. It's about using what you have to get the job done. Virak seemed to contemplate this for a moment. Then he surprised Samuel again. You know, I thought humans were just, well, weak, but you've shown me that's not true. Maybe we've all underestimated you. Samuel took a step back, processing the words. They were more than he had expected. He had always known humans had something to offer, something more than brute strength or flashy weapons. But hearing it from Virak, someone who had looked down on him for so long, was different. It felt like a victory in itself. Thanks, Samuel said quietly, feeling a wave of gratitude he didn't know he was capable of. That means a lot coming from you. Virak's eyes softened slightly, and he gave Samuel a nod. You earned it, Roberts. You've got guts. I respect that. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Samuel felt something he hadn't expected to feel, belonging. He wasn't just a human struggling to prove his worth. He was Samuel Roberts, and he had just done what many had said was impossible. And somehow, that felt more important than any praise or respect he could get. As Virak walked away, Samuel couldn't help but smile. Maybe this galaxy wasn't so impossible for humans after all. He had made his mark. He had proven that humanity wasn't weak and that they could stand beside the galaxy's greatest without fear. For the first time, Samuel felt a deep sense of purpose. There was so much more to do, so many more challenges ahead. But he was ready. He had the strength to survive. He had the will to fight. And in that moment, he knew that he was capable of more than even he had realized. The days after the Slingshot incident were a whirlwind. The whispers that had once mocked Samuel Roberts now followed him with quiet respect. The cadets who had dismissed him as nothing more than a human from a primitive world now watched him with curiosity, sometimes even admiration. For the first time since he had arrived at the Galactic Military Academy, Samuel felt like he belonged. But even with the respect that had begun to grow, Samuel knew the hardest part was still ahead of him. Proving himself in one test was no guarantee. The galaxy was full of beings far stronger and more advanced than he was. If he wanted to make it here, he would need to keep showing that his place was earned, not given. The next challenge came faster than Samuel expected. The announcement was simple, and yet it sent a shiver through him. Today, Cadet Roberts will face the final trial, the survival test. You will be dropped into an environment designed to push you to the edge of your limits. You have no allies. Your survival will depend on your ability to adapt and overcome. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the other cadets, all of whom were already whispering among themselves. The news of his previous success with the slingshot had spread, but now they were all waiting to see if it had been a fluke. Would Samuel Roberts, the human who had defied expectations, survive this next trial? Or was he just a flash of luck in a galaxy that cared little for underdogs? His pulse quickened as the lights dimmed, signaling the start of the trial. The arena was to be a simulation of an alien world, and Samuel could already hear the whir of the equipment coming to life around him. The test was designed to simulate an environment where survival was the key to victory, an unpredictable world filled with dangers both environmental and hostile. For the next few hours, he would be on his own. No help, no hand to hold, just him and his ability to adapt. The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss and the heat hit him first. His breath caught in his throat as he stepped onto the barren, red dirt of the alien world. The sky above him was a sickly orange, streaked with black clouds. The air tasted strange, stale, and metallic, and the wind whipped dust into his eyes. As he took in his surroundings, Samuel's heart beat faster. The landscape stretched for miles, littered with jagged rocks, twisted trees, and distant peaks shrouded in mist. It looked nothing like Earth, and everything like a place that didn't care if you lived or died. "Survive," came a voice from nowhere, the voice of Zorlok, the instructor. "Adapt, complete the task, and return to the base. Your time starts now." The ground beneath Samuel's boots cracked with each step, the air thick with the scent of sulfur and ash. It wasn't long before he encountered his first obstacle, a massive, six-legged creature that emerged from behind a rock. Its eyes were a bright, angry red, and its mouth was lined with sharp, jagged teeth. Samuel froze. The creature seemed to be studying him, its massive body swaying. He knew what this was. It was a predator, just like the ones that roamed Earth's wilderness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The instinct to run was strong, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panicking would get him killed. He needed to think. There were no weapons in his possession, no advanced tech to defend himself. His slingshot had proven useful once, but he didn't have any stones nearby. His mind raced. He wasn't going to fight the creature directly. He had learned from his past challenges. Survival wasn't always about fighting, it was about outthinking your opponent. The creature moved closer, its claws scraping against the rocky ground. Samuel took a deep breath and quickly surveyed the landscape. He needed an escape plan. There, just to the right, a narrow cliffside with a natural gap between the rocks. If he could get there, he could make the creature follow him into a dead end, trapping it for long enough to escape. With no more time to waste, Samuel acted. He sprinted toward the gap, glancing over his shoulder to see the creature charging after him. Its legs moved quickly, and it was gaining on him. His heart raced, but he didn't look back. His feet pounded the dirt, kicking up clouds of dust as he leapt toward the narrow gap. The creature was close now, its snarls filling the air. Samuel made it into the gap just as the beast lunged at him. He barely squeezed through the tight space, and the creature was right behind him, but it couldn't follow. Its massive body was too large, its claws scraping against the rock as it tried to force its way through. Samuel could feel the vibrations from the creature's frustration as it clawed at the rocks in vain. He took a few deep breaths, his heart still hammering. He had done it. The creature was trapped, for now anyway, but he wasn't safe yet. He had used his wits to survive, just like he had back at the academy, and that's what he had to keep doing, using his human mind to outsmart the dangers around him. He kept moving. As he moved deeper into the alien landscape, the environment only grew more hostile. The air grew thinner and strange creatures watched from the shadows. The sun burned down harshly and the rocky ground seemed to shift beneath his feet. But Samuel didn't slow down. He had been preparing for this, even if he hadn't known it. Every time he'd been underestimated, every time the odds had been against him, he had learned to fight in his own way. He had learned to think, to adapt, to survive. Hours passed and Samuel's body ached, his muscles sore from running and climbing. He had faced creatures, harsh terrain, and his own doubts, but something inside him kept pushing him forward. The task wasn't about brute strength or advanced weapons. It was about using what he had, his determination, his resourcefulness, and his will to survive. And that was enough. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Samuel reached the base. He was battered, exhausted, and covered in dirt, but he had made it. The gates of the academy opened and he stepped through, collapsing to his knees. He had passed the test, not because he was the strongest, but because he refused to give up. Instructor Zorlok stood nearby, his red eyes glowing softly. "Cadet Roberts," he said, his voice steady, "you have proven that it is not just the weapon that determines your survival, but your will. You faced the impossible and returned. Well done." Samuel looked up at him, breathing heavily, and for the first time he allowed himself to smile. He had done it. He had survived. And he had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of. He wasn't just a human cadet anymore. He was a fighter. And this was only the beginning. Samuel sat alone in the small room he had been assigned at the Galactic Military Academy. His body was sore, bruised from the brutal survival test that had pushed him to his physical limits. He could still feel the rawness of the cuts on his skin, the tightness in his muscles. But despite the pain, there was something else inside him, something deeper, something he had never felt before. He had survived. The test had been brutal, but it wasn't the physical challenges that had truly tested him. It was the mental ones, the moments when everything inside him screamed to quit, to give in to the overwhelming odds. But he hadn't. Samuel had pushed through the darkness, finding his way back to the academy gates when so many other cadets would have faltered. As he sat on the bed, staring at the wall, the door slid open and a figure stepped inside. It was Instructor Zorlok, the towering Telkari who had overseen the test. His red eyes gleamed, but there was something in his expression now that wasn't there before, something like recognition. "Cadet Roberts," Zorlok said, his voice steady, yet somehow softer than usual. "I must admit, you've surprised me." Samuel didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, unsure of how to feel. He had heard those words before from his mother, from his friends back on Earth, from a few of the cadets in his class. But hearing them from Zorlok, it hit differently. Zorlok was not just any instructor. He was a symbol of the Academy's highest expectations. He was the one who tested everyone's limits. "I didn't expect you to make it," Zorlok continued, his voice cold yet tinged with something that sounded like respect. "But you did. You not only survived the test, you adapted. You used your mind, your environment, and your resilience to overcome the impossible." Samuel felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected praise from Zorlok, certainly not after the harshness of the test. His mind replayed the moments when he had been alone on that alien planet, facing creatures, navigating treacherous terrain, and struggling to keep himself from giving up. But now, in this moment, it all seemed worth it. The pain, the exhaustion, the fear, it had led to this recognition. "Thank you," Samuel said quietly. His voice felt weak, even though he had just fought to prove his strength. There was still a lingering doubt inside him, a part of him that wondered if the recognition was just a fluke. Was he really cut out for this academy? Was he really enough? Zorlok didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied Samuel for a long moment, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. Finally, he spoke again. "You've earned your place here. You've proven that humans can stand among the stars. But remember, this was only one test. There are many more challenges ahead. Your future here is far from certain." Samuel nodded, the weight of Zorlok's words sinking in. He had faced one challenge, but there would be many more challenges that would push him even further, test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, he felt something inside him shift. It wasn't just the fear of failure that he had carried for so long. It was the quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, he could do this. He could succeed. He could belong here. "Thank you, Instructor," Samuel said, his voice stronger this time. Zorlok turned to leave, but paused just before exiting. He looked back at Samuel, a flicker of something like pride in his red eyes. "Keep proving them wrong, Cadet Roberts. Keep showing them that a human can do what they believe is impossible." As the door closed behind Zorlok, Samuel sat there for a moment, the words echoing in his mind. He had done it. He had shown them that humans weren't weak, weren't inferior. He had fought for his place, and now he had earned it. But the hardest part was yet to come. The sun was setting on the simulation, casting long shadows across the jungle. Samuel crouched low behind a thick tree trunk, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His heart was pounding, but his mind was sharp. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was the moment that would define everything. The combat trial had started hours ago, and Samuel had already faced more obstacles than he could count. He fought off hostile cadets, avoided traps set by the simulation, and outsmarted enemy units that far outclassed him in strength and technology. Now, as the simulation continued to shift, he was nearing the final stage of the trial, the last test, and his opponent. The same cadet he had faced in the survival trial, an elite fighter from the Zalgan species, whose sheer strength had nearly overwhelmed Samuel during their last encounter. Samuel had no illusions. He knew he wasn't the strongest. He knew he didn't have the fancy weapons or advanced tech that the other cadets had. But what he had, what no one could take from him, was his will to survive. It was something the other cadets couldn't understand, something they could never quite match. And that, Samuel realized, was what made all the difference. He peeked around the tree, his eyes scanning the dense jungle. The simulation's environment had shifted again, now a thick tangle of vines and brush. His senses were on high alert, every sound amplified in his ears. He could hear movement. His opponent was close. His grip tightened around the slingshot he had brought into the simulation, a simple weapon, but it had already proven itself once. It wasn't much, but it was all he had, and he was going to make it work. His eyes narrowed as he heard the crunch of leaves underfoot. He needed to act fast. The Zalgan was a hunter, relentless and powerful. Samuel's only chance was to outthink him. With a swift motion, Samuel darted through the underbrush, moving as quietly as possible, staying low to the ground. The thick vines seemed to tangle around his legs, but he pushed through, focusing on his breathing. Every step brought him closer to the confrontation. He wasn't running anymore. This was it. This was his stand. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer now. Samuel could feel the presence of his opponent nearby, and his muscles tensed in anticipation. The Zalgan was fast, but Samuel had learned how to use the environment to his advantage. He had been through this before. This time, he was ready. He found a small clearing in the jungle just wide enough for him to move around. He knelt down, pulling a small rock from the ground. His slingshot was ready. He didn't need much, just the right moment. Then he heard it, a low growl, a rumble in the air. The Zalgan stepped into the clearing, his body massive and intimidating. He wore dark, heavy armor that glinted in the fading light. His weapon was a massive energy axe, pulsing with power. He scanned the area with keen eyes, but Samuel knew he wouldn't see him, not yet. The Zalgan grunted, stepping forward, clearly confident. "I know you're here, human. You can't hide forever." Samuel swallowed hard, the familiar fear creeping in, but he shoved it down. The fear wasn't going to stop him now. He had come this far. He wasn't going to back down. Now, Samuel moved quickly, rolling out from behind a thick bush, sending the rock flying toward the Zalgan's exposed side. It was a quick strike, not powerful enough to do serious damage, but enough to distract him. The Zalgan roared, spinning around to face the direction of the attack. Samuel's heart raced as he took his shot. The slingshot flew, the stone cutting through the air with a sharp whistle. The target was the gap in the Zalgan's armor, the weak point Samuel had noticed during their previous encounters. His hands were steady as the stone hit its mark with a resounding crack. The Zalgan staggered back, growling in pain, but the beast didn't fall. Samuel could see the fury in his eyes. He was still dangerous, still a force to be reckoned with, but Samuel had an edge now. The Zalgan was injured, his movements slightly slower. Samuel didn't hesitate. He dove into action, moving with every ounce of speed he could muster. He had to act fast before his opponent recovered. He couldn't let this slip away. He darted in, using the slingshot again, aiming for the weak spot in the Zalgan's armor. His hands moved faster than he thought possible, firing with precision. The stone struck the Zalgan's side again, this time causing him to stumble, the blow weakening his balance. The Zalgan swung his massive axe in retaliation, but Samuel was already rolling out of the way. He used the environment again, darting between the trees, weaving through the thick jungle. His opponent was fast, but Samuel was faster, his human adaptability allowing him to stay one step ahead. He couldn't let up, he couldn't stop. The Zalgan's steps were heavy, his roars of anger filling the air. Samuel's chest was burning, his muscles screaming for rest, but he didn't allow himself to slow down. He was almost there. As the Zalgan advanced, Samuel saw the opening, an area where the trees had thinned, a small ledge with a drop that could give him the advantage. The Zalgan was too focused on his pursuit to see it. Samuel took a deep breath, focusing everything on his next move. He sprinted toward the ledge, using the momentum to leap over it. The Zalgan followed, but he wasn't ready for the fall. As the massive warrior lunged forward, his foot slipped, sending him stumbling over the edge. For a moment, the Zalgan's massive body teetered, and that was all Samuel needed. In one smooth motion, Samuel fired the slingshot again, sending a final stone toward his opponent's vulnerable spot. The Zalgan roared one last time before falling backward, his body crashing against the rocks below. The jungle fell silent, the only sound the heavy breaths escaping from Samuel's chest. He stood there, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. Against all odds, against the strength and power of his opponent, he had survived. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then the voice of Instructor Zorlok crackled over the comms. "Cadet Roberts, you have completed the trial. Your performance was impressive." Samuel's legs finally gave out, and he collapsed to his knees, the weight of the fight and the relief of victory overwhelming him. He had done it. He had proven something to himself and to everyone who had ever doubted him. As the simulation faded and the jungle melted away into the familiar walls of the academy, Samuel's heart still raced. He wasn't just a human cadet anymore. He was a fighter, a survivor, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged. The galaxy had just seen what humanity could do, and Samuel Roberts was ready for whatever came next.